today. Since 2014, there is ongoing war in Ukraine. From 2022, the full-scale war. And it's hard to avoid this topic for our discussion. So I would like Yuliya to talk a little bit at the beginning about the situation of a poet facing the war. Before, a few hours before this meeting, we had a session about the borderland, about bridging, but now we have also the situation of borderline being at the edge of survival, being at the edge of the existence of the whole country, the whole nation. And what is the position, a situation of a poet, Yuliya, in such circumstances? Your book of poetry includes poems you wrote before 2022, but still they are still facing the war. How do you feel this situation as a poet?
Hello, everyone. Krzysztof, thank you for the excellent question. And yes, this book was written after the time that Russia has attacked and invaded Ukraine, the eastern parts of Ukraine, Lugansk, parts of Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and illegally annexed Crimea. And me living quite far from those places, in the western part of Ukraine, in Lviv, I still felt this war, because I think the poets, they have this ability to empathize. And of course, it was concerning all of us, even if it was not affecting the entire country at that moment. There was also a sort of premonition that this conflict, so to say, will turn into a large-scale war. So this attack will not stop. And of course, I started writing about the war immediately in 2014. And at that time, there were poems like Emergency Bag or Men Carry War inside them, which very easily could have been taken for poems from today. But this was a premonition, because Russia has imperial ambitions. And I think that letting go of Ukraine with the dissolvement of Soviet Union, they thought that this would be temporary, and they had a plan to restore their empire again. So mostly from the history, but also from this internal feeling, there was this thought that there might be a bigger war. So as a poet, of course, most of the poetry that I created was about something not happening directly to me, but more reflections of how it is for people affected about the war, or the future perspectives of all of us. But it's a different thing when you are getting affected directly. When you hear explosions in your city, that you feel that they are right directly outside of your window, and you're lying on the bathroom floor shielding your kid with your body. The reality breaks apart, and so does the language. So this is completely different poetry that I'm writing after 2022. Although, yes, as I said, the war sort of crept into my poems very early, and it stayed there. And now, of course, our entire reality is filled with war, and that's the key topic of poetry in Ukraine right now.
Let's stay for a moment with language, because you've mentioned that there is a huge difference between the poems written years before, after 2014, but still before, and today. What the core difference is between these two periods? What's changed in your poetry language?
Well, in order to speak about the war that affects you directly, you also feel this rational need to find a new language. And there's also this irrational thing where you need to pick up the words and just get yourself together and continue to speak. Because when something terrible like this happens, you're out of words. You're numb. You're mute. And then, of course, you're filled with all these heavy emotions like pain and grief and fear, of course, mostly for your loved ones. And then what is inside of you, it needs to go out. And also a poet, I feel the poet has a responsibility to get the message across. Because the poet is, in a way, a spokesperson for the country, for the society. It's not official, of course, but is that a real poet who does not empathize with their people, with their country? So mostly the poetry coming out was very simple, very direct, very straightforward. And I mean, of course, in order to write about war crimes of Russians, of destruction, bombings, rapes, lootings, kidnapping, you do need a completely different language. I feel that in a way it's like a weapon language. It needs to be sharp, and because it's a language to tell the truth, and in a way to witness. Of course, we are not directly witnessing in the place, but we can reflect very much on what is going on.
You are saying about the position of poet being a messenger to the outside world of their own people. Don't you feel it as a burden as a poet? Sometimes you can face this position of other writers that they want to be independent, that they want to be more free, cut off from this context of belonging to any kind of community, country, society, because we are writers. We belong to the autonomous republic of literature, of poetry. How do you think about this when you face this position, for example, of Russian authors, writers? I very often face this, that we do not have anything together with Putin. That we are autonomous. We are just writers. And don't blame us about something what this politician is doing. How do you react to such kind of statements?
Yeah. No matter the stance we are taking, we are still the humans. And as humans, we can empathize other humans, and we can feel the responsibility. So I think this is the lack of humanity, this stance to separate yourself. It, in a way, makes you a little worse human if you're not empathizing, if you're not doing what you can to help, if you can help. And also the Russian authors, in a way, they can take a stance, but they are refusing to do that.
Can we read some of your poems now?
Well, the book, I'll start a little about the concept of the book. So the book, The God of Freedom, the central idea is that there's this divine force of freedom that lives inside every human being. And when this freedom is taken away or challenged, it transforms you. So this is basically now is the time when freedom of Ukraine, of Ukrainians, is attacked and is under threat. So I will read a poem that is a little related to what you were speaking about, being separate from all this chaos and just taking a separate stance and concentrating on your art. Well, I feel art cannot live in a separate container. It's not a real art then. So the title of the poem is A Home to Freedom. The man that became my home wants to become my freedom. But he is failing. He thinks that I'm overplaying, exaggerating, overwriting the words of familiar songs, ravaging the principles of calligraphy, distorting the words of prayers, acting recklessly, making a mountain out of a molehill, crushing a fly upon a wheel, and all that. How will our home have room for so many great things, so many phenomena and creations, so many implausible characters, natural disasters, and global issues? Our home is not a bottomless pit. It cannot hold it all. It will explode and disappear off the face of the earth. There is only one solution. The home will learn to grow, gradually growing and growing until it fills everything around us, until it becomes freedom itself. So this is a dialogue, an imaginary dialogue with a person who says, how can you care about things that are far from us? And I'm sure that there were certain people, even in Ukraine, that didn't care much about the war that was going on only in some parts of the country, were not affected directly. And now they might have changed their stance, and I'm quite sure of it. But this situation can be scaled globally. If you don't care what affects you directly, then, well, things might change, and you might really analyze and look how you make the situation better in your place, because there might be a time when it affects you too. And this is about the war now, Russia's war in Ukraine. Because the outcome of this war might affect, or I'm sure it will affect, the entire world. Because it's already a battle against democracy, against core human values. It's a test for humanity, whether the international law and order will withstand, whether democracies will still be existent, or it will be a new era of totalitarianism.
I found it beautiful to understand that home can grow, and it's going together with freedom. And so I guess that also this is something specific for your experience, that the meanings of the words are changing also because of that situation. That what very often I found in your poetry, there are certain words, certain values, which got new meanings, new senses, you know, to the words like home in this poem, yes? And do you have some, because the experience I have from Ukrainian poetry, you know, when we read it, we are publishing a lot of this poetry, giving the voice to Ukrainians, but also to try to understand what's going on with this word. And one of the main lessons we gain is that the language is also under the test. That the language of values we use in democracy, in freedom, is putting to the edge. and it can appear that it's losing its sense, its previous sense, and you find new meanings for that to survive also. So the battle is also for the language to survive it, yes, not to give it up to the ideologies or propaganda or so on. Can you give some other examples of how the language is changing because of this wartime and experience you have in Ukraine?
Freedom is something which is repeated so many times globally, and I feel that this word has also lost its meaning, and now we are giving a new meaning to freedom with our fighting in Ukraine, because freedom has been taken for granted. And now there is a demonstration of how freedom should be fought for, and it requires sacrifice. Well, and with the meaning of home, of course, now there are certain things that we have been holding dear, but now there's much bigger sense in that, because you do understand the true meaning of home when you are forced out of it. When you are driven out of it, when it's not your will to leave it. And there's another layer of this when, for example, on the occupied territories, Russians are taking over people's homes, and there are Russian soldiers living in the Ukrainians' houses. And I cannot imagine this completely excruciating pain. Everyday words that have changed their meaning. Now there's this special meaning when we say, I'm in the hallway, or I'm in the hall. Because there's this rule, it's a little optimistic, but there's this rule when there's an air raid alert. You have to be behind 2 walls, or at least quite far from the window. So in case there's a bombing and the windows are flying out, you are maybe less affected. So the safest place in the house can be a hallway. Sometimes it's a bathroom, but there are certain glass things in the bathroom that can break. So hallway, when I'm in the hallway, it means I'm in the safe place. But of course, it is optimistic, because the best place to be is an air raid shelter. But first, not every house has a real underground shelter. And the second, in some cities, there are so many air raid alerts, or there can be air raid alert the entire day and night. So people just cannot live their lives this way. So, there are very many words, and there's this great book in Ukraine called The Dictionary of War that is assembled works from different writers and edited by another poet from Ukraine, Ostap Slivinsky, that addresses different words and their meanings and how they have changed now.
Another word which is coming to my mind is victory. Peremocha. And I want to ask you about that, Yuliya. What, in your understanding, the victory will be? I know the wars, like, for example, in former Yugoslavia, where this word was not present in vocabulary. Nobody was talking about victory in former Yugoslavia, and nobody was feeling being victorious after this war. There was no victory in the war. But you, Ukrainians, put at stake victory as something you are really fighting for. But what would be, in your understanding, victory for Ukraine?
Well, I think first and foremost, justice. Justice needs to be served. So when some say that we should just let go of the occupied lands, it is not just about the territories. It's about the people who live there and who are in the constant threat. So, I mean, this the justice needs to be served. The war crimes, those who have committed these war crimes and those who have ordered them, they must be punished. And then we have to restore our borders, and it means both the eastern and some south parts that are temporarily occupied by Russia and the Crimean Peninsula, but also the justice needs to be served and the reparations need to be paid out, because there's a huge damage that was done to Ukraine by Russia. And now when I'm speaking about this, it sounds quite optimistic, but I also feel that when we are able to say certain things, it is the first step for them to come to life. So it is important to voice that.
This is what you are saying about justice is very crucial in the situation with Russia, because we have the state, the country, since centuries not being punished for the crimes. Yeah, so it's not only Ukrainian case, but it was all before, all Gulag, all crimes never were put into the court, and never justice was taken out. So it could be, if it will happen, what you are saying now, it will be also something important, very important, I guess, for Russians themselves, that finally, after centuries, they can punish criminals, that they can punish people responsible for crimes. Mm-hmm.
It is difficult for me to think about Russians at the moment, because I'm thinking about my fellow Ukrainians, and each time I'm abroad, I think about my friends, my loved ones that are now in a dangerous place. But of course, the Soviet crimes were not punished. Soviet, as the totalitarian state, committed many crimes, and it requires not just one separate session, but probably an entire large-scale event to walk you through all of these. And this is why they're committed again. So the unpunished evil, it is being repeated. It comes back. And well, this is the slogan that Russians love to use, that we can repeat. And I should mention there was a picture of a Russian girl came out on social media, and she was wearing a T-shirt with a graphic of a Bucha massacre. You know, Bucha is a place where Russians committed horrible crimes in the spring of 2022. And here's this picture on the T-shirt about the crime where I think over 400 people were killed. So that there's this butcher butchering a pig, and it's called the Bucha massacre. And under it, there is this slogan, we can repeat. But this does not only concern Ukraine. I think in this case, this shows the entire face of Russian society that is completely contaminated with hate. And this is not just hate against Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Unpunished evil can come back always and be repeated. I think it's a great lesson for us. Maybe we can come back to your poems again. Mm-hmm.
I will also continue this line of the Soviet totalitarian state, because this book does have an unwritten dedication. And it's a dedication to my father, who in the times of Soviet occupation was punished for his love for freedom. Because a totalitarian state is where any pursuit of freedom can be punished. And in his case, he came from a poor working family. His mother was a nurse. Father has left the family, but he was very talented in foreign languages. So he entered the university and he started working as a translator. So he worked with English. He was very fluent in English and good in Polish and German, and was also learning other languages like Czech and Hungarian. And he also loved Western music. You all know the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. And in Soviet times, you could be punished for all of that. If the talent didn't serve the regime, then it had to be destroyed. So he was persecuted, he was tortured, and he could not continue his university education. He had to go and work at the factory. And there he was disabled after some time, because it's a person who was meant to be an intellectual. And you know, this story of my father, it came up to me when he got sick. He was at the hospital, and he started telling the details of these events of his past that he didn't dare to share before. And I was very much affected by that. And this, as a coincidence, I was reading a novel by Arundhati Roy at that time, The God of Small Things, you all know. And the protagonist, Veluta, who was punished for defying the societal norms, his story reminded me about the story of my father. And my father, when he was tortured by KGB, they mocked him. They said, "How can you trade a comfortable life for freedom? Are you praying to the God of freedom or what? You're praying to a certain God," they said. So my father was not open about the situation. I think this fear, it still lives in people of older generation, in some of them. They don't call the Soviet times the Soviet occupation. They call it the Soviet rule, because there's this trauma. But you know, poetry gives you a way to tell the story in a very discreet way. So this is when I wrote a couple of poems that are included in this book. They have no direct dedication, but my father read them, and really I think he was not ready to share his reaction because it was very much about him. But I will share one of them with you. And it's really about the events that happened in 1970s. It's called For the High Wave. "Don't kiss my forehead as if I am deceased," he says. "Almost twice as thin as before, all glasses and eyes. The pills mixed with sweets, the pages of his book yellow just like his skin. He endlessly sifts and pours through some of his priceless tales. I see all the people involved like old acquaintances. The KGB major in shiny Hungarian shoes. You could be killed for those. Who sat on the hospital bed, grinning. Who said, 'These Beatles, these foreign languages won't do any good. Everything is for the chosen, not for the orphans, the poor relations. No wonder you ended up here, better be quiet as a mouse.' Those like you we rounded up in the alleys, cut you off at the roots. You touched the souls of respected people, so honor them. Could have been like a son or a punching bag of warm, living meat. I see that woman again, her crooked, bright mouth, her spider-like paws, overly ornate porcelain, metal instruments. A musty apartment with extremely high ceilings. And most clearly, him, handsome, with a guitar, with eyes wide open and thumbs in the pockets of jeans. I wore them then myself. With thousands of pages of books in his memory. With a face open to the world, to the high, dark waters. Not for a girl, not to win a bet, for a free wing spread, for the high wave, even one over his head.
Thank you very much. I will stay for a moment, Yuliya, again with the language. When I hear and read your poetry, I admire kind of a emotional balance you keep. So your poems are not too emotional. You don't romanticize the victimhood, which often happened during, hard wars circumstances, that we have poetry, full of emotions, of patriotic slogans and words and languages, to build solidarity against a common enemy and so on and so on. I don't see it in your poetry very much. I don't see it very much in Ukrainian modern poetry. There is a kind of maturity in your language, keeping your emotions silent and trying to balance it. And I try to connect this language with your position, with your presence in the festivals like we have now, or many other different places in the world, because you are messengers from this battlefield of Ukraine. And people very often can say, okay, but you are too subjective. We don't trust you because you are not objective, that you are, too emotional, that we should see these things from more distant and so on. How do you respond to that? How do you feel being this kind of messenger or being the poet, fighting to keep the balance of your emotions and so on?
I should probably start with saying that we were pretty much vaccinated against the pathos in the poetry with our school program literature in the times of Soviet occupation, because there was so much of it. And this was an example on how not to write civic kind of poetry or texts. And the other thing, when you're telling the truth, you don't need to exaggerate. You don't need to look for, the decorative elements to make it bigger than it is, because the reality is massive, is very strong, and it speaks for itself. And now, in these times, we say that reality beats imagination. It's more important to be attentive. And how can you not be attentive when it happens around you, when it happens to your friends? So, and about being a messenger, I didn't choose to be a messenger. I think I was on the big stage for the first time in April of 2022 in Katowice. It was Poland. And I was really trying to get myself together, because these times were really very emotional for us, with many news of war crimes coming in. But then I saw the eyes of the audience. I saw that they listened to me, and if I had an opportunity to be heard, then I need to speak. So, and this is huge responsibility, of course, because now as poets, of course, we carry our own poetry in a way, we carry the collective experience, but also there are poets who cannot be here for different reasons. One reason that they were killed by Russians. The other reason, they are now allowing us to be here, defending our possibility to breathe and also to speak. So our writers who are now in the military. So each time I feel that I need to not just speak and present my own work, but also the work of others. And I often say that when I'm on the stage, I feel that there are people behind my shoulders, this invisible presence, and of course it gives me strength. And as about being emotional, well, I always think that the person that says such things needs to put himself or herself into our shoes, and just imagine that. How would you react? Yes, if you are burying your friend of many years, and then on that evening you had to jump on a train and go then fly to an international conference, and yeah, that's a real life situation that happens to me after Victoria Melina was killed. My fellow writer, who is also from Lviv, who was killed by a Russian missile in Kramatorsk in a very civic settings at a pizzeria. And we were, a lot of us were at this funeral, and my other friend, writer Olena Husseinova, was in Kiev, and there was this farewell ritual in Kiev, and she attended it in Kiev, and I was at the funeral in Lviv. But we had this invitation, and we both were not aware if we were in the condition to go. But then Olena had some time to, I don't know, recuperate, think about it, and she wrote to me, "We must go, because we will tell her story, we will tell the stories of other poets. And we need to be heard. It's important for us to be heard, because Ukraine has become visible, but it's still a blank, sort of a blank spot. And it needs to be filled with the senses, with cultural senses, with the understanding of history, the mentality. And if we have this opportunity, then I think we must take it."
The last question I have before I will give the voice to the audience is, because we are talking about you poets, your personal, your other Ukrainian poets being messengers and giving the voice and representing the country outside in the world, in the festivals, in the gatherings, and so on. But how poetry lives within Ukraine today, how it goes with poetry within the country under the war circumstances. Do you read poetry? Do you have poetry meetings? Do you publish poetry books, or your head is somewhere else?
Well, poetry has always been very big in Ukraine. A person who we call maybe even a founding father of the nation, or the author of this idea of Ukrainian independence, is a poet, Taras Shevchenko. But it's not only in the past. We do not only honor our classics, but also now I think people are quite hungry for poetry. It's both about exploring your background, your identity, and appreciating your identity. And also, this is something that you can lose, because Russia is targeting the culture and identity, and people are holding on to things they think they can lose very soon. And also, on the other hand, it's about collective experience, because mostly the poems are about things we are experiencing together. So we have this tradition to publish on social media. So new poems are often published in social media, and people are looking forward to that, and they are reacting to that. And there are poetry events, of course. And I should say that all of the cultural events in Ukraine, they're still going on, but they all have this charitable cause. Mostly it's fundraising for the military, but also for those in need, the affected people. And there are many cultural events like that. I have not been traveling for the past 3 months before India, and I was staying in Lviv, but I thought I could take a break, but there were so many events and readings. And of course, you almost never can say no when it's in your city and you're available. And people are coming, they're full audiences. Another thing is that as to poetry collections, my own publisher who published The God of Freedom in Ukrainian, The Old Lion, the editor-in-chief Mariana Savka, she founded this first poetry festival in Ukraine. It's an international festival that happened in November in Lviv. And I should say it gathered 2,000 people. And also we had full rooms almost at every session. So this shows this vigor of the Ukrainian culture and also of Ukrainian community, that Ukrainian cultural community is united, and is united not only as creators of culture, but also the supporters of our defenders. So there's, I should say, this huge need and huge demand for poetry. And also the Old Lion published twice as many new poetry titles compared to the previous year. This is the statistics that I was interested in because I was giving another interview to Daily Telegraph. So I was really interested in the statistics. There are really many new poetry collections published this year. So yeah, there's a certain meaning with poetry. Of course, it's you cannot compare it to a weapon. You wish, yes, but it's a way to tell the truth and to stay united.
Yes, I can only confirm your words, being there from time to time and being really amazed how vigorous poetry is in Ukraine on all levels, publishing, translating, authors meeting and gatherings. It's amazing. So maybe before we will ask for the first question, the poem, yes, from Yuliya. Mm. I will help you.
Oh, I found it.
Yes.
So again, this book explores different aspects of freedom, and it's not only fighting for independence, but also freedom of self-fulfillment, freedom of a child growing up, freedom of a person whose health gets affected. So there's a lot about the very civilian topics here also, from the peaceful life. But also in the times of war, of course, we still have love, friendship, and this is where we take our strength from. So this is kind of a symbolic poem. It's called Tenderness. The sun kisses my face. I want so much to save at least a sip of this height, so blue, for later. The animal song of reddened leaves, a swirl of wild grape wines exploding from roofs. We seem unperishable, as if no one after us will divide a yellow pear in half, as in communion. Will forgive one another while hugging the whole world, not allowing petals to fall from numb blossoms. The movement of a green dragonfly's wings, the tremble of eyelashes, a children's toy abandoned in the grass, a flock of honey mushrooms that hatched around stumps. This emergence is witness to a new day coming. How long should we pull before realizing the cord is strong? Tenderness, a rope that keeps us from falling out of the boat. You hold so many treasures in your hands, my love. We have too little time not to believe, so we must.
Thank you very much, Yuliya, and please feel invited to the discussion and to raise questions. If not, we can. Okay.
What's something you find challenging about communicating to audiences that don't relate to your personal experience? So basically, outside Ukraine, you've traveled to many countries, and what are some of the barriers of understanding that you sense, even when people are well intentioned? What's something that you think or something you'd like to clarify if you had the opportunity?
Well, I think that a person who has not lived through similar experience cannot fully understand, no matter how hard we try. Even if the poetry is very good, it touches upon certain emotional notes. It does. But I have no illusion that people will fully understand. Of course, there's some of the context that we Ukrainians recognize immediately. Some certain markers that are clear to us and that needs special explanation. There's quite a lot of footnotes that we need to explain some things in the culture, some geographical names. But I should say that I think my task is to shorten this distance between our experience and the audience. Just bring it closer. You can never really feel it physically in your body. But mostly where I travel and when I interact with audience, I'm getting quite good feedback. I feel this energy and I see it in people's eyes, and really we are sharing this experience so that this experience is that you never experience it in real life, because this is also a warning of what can happen. And for us, we really are, as we have spoken about the meaning of home, and there is this meaning of our global home. And it's also like one entire human body. When one part is hurting and something is very wrong, it can affect the entire body. So of course there are barriers, but it does not discourage me from speaking. Thank you.
Some other questions?
The poetry coming out of you is limited to the freedom considering the current situation, but you can explore you are missing the other genres of poetry considering the current situation. And secondly, what's the counter response from the Russian poetry? Want to know about that.
That's a very good question. Thank you. As I mentioned, even in the times of war, we'll still experiencing love. We still have our family. We still can enjoy a beautiful sunset. But of course, over all of this hangs this looming shadow of war. So people would write on other themes, but these would be pierced by the presence of war. So I don't feel that we're missing out in any way. And as to the response of Russian poets, we feel that they're very much centered on their own suffering, so to say. They feel that they are now deprived on certain things, of certain privileges. They're looked upon as somehow responsible of this situation. So they could not do the work with their own society to prevent this war. And even now in their poetry, they're mostly focused on themselves. And this is what really pushes us even further away from any interaction. Thank you.
Just to follow up to that one, do you feel like there is much creative back and forth between Russia and Ukraine? Oh, do you feel like there is much creative back and forth between Russia and Ukraine? Creative communication, back and forth. I think what she means is by a response to what she writes, more like a response to her poetry. Do you feel like there's much connection between the creative communities in Russia versus in Ukraine? Do you think they're speaking directly to each other or more so speaking to the rest of the world? Yeah.
If you are in dialogue with them, or is there any dialogue?
Okay, let's imagine the situation. So there's a woman, and the woman is being raped. Is she in dialogue with her rapist? So this is very similar to what the communities, how the communities can be interacting in times like this. But this is a very good question. Thank you for asking it.